Hey everyone, today we're jumping into an explainer covering some seriously profound source material. We're going to bridge two worlds that, honestly, we usually keep totally separate. On one side, you have the massive, fast paced machinery of modern business, and on the other, the quiet, sometimes really painful depths of our own emotional and spiritual lives. We'll be unpacking a fascinating framework that reconciles those modern corporate struggles with deep, faith based, holistic healing. So let's just dive right into this. Let me ask you something right off the bat. Do you feel like your work is just a secular burden, or are you carrying around this invisible emotional weight all day? It's a pretty heavy question, isn't it? Because so many of us are out there just surviving in toxic workplaces while harboring these unresolved internal wounds. The texts we're looking at today make a compelling argument. The exhaustion you feel sitting at your desk and the emotional baggage you carry in your heart are actually deeply connected. They aren't separate issues you just have to manage. They're symptoms of a fracture in how we view our core purpose. As you'll see, we're going to journey from the outward, macro struggles of the corporate world right into the inward, micro journey of spiritual healing. Here is our quick roadmap for today. We'll cover the crisis of modern life, the theology of the workplace, building kingdom enterprises, steps to holistic healing, the power of forgiveness, and finally, bring it all together in our conclusion. All right, Section 1, the crisis of modern life and the toll it takes on us. The source texts definitely pull no punches when describing the harsh realities of our modern, globalized society. I mean, in this relentless pursuit of profit, we've watched toxic corporate cultures just explode. We're talking about environments defined by extreme pressure, psychological manipulation, and, frankly, a severe loss of basic ethics. When people are treated like literal cogs in a machine, it leads to intense emotional anxiety, exploitation, and ultimately complete and utter burnout. And the cost of that burnout? It is staggering. The source material on medical and spiritual healing points out a reality that is just mind-blowing. 75% of physical illnesses actually originate from emotional issues and unresolved trauma. So here's the absolute crucial takeaway. The macro toxicity of the corporate world is directly inflicting micro physical and emotional damage on you as an individual. Put simply, when the workplace is sick, we get sick. But thankfully, the texts don't just leave us with a depressing diagnosis. They offer a radical reframe. Which brings us to Section 2, Theology of the Workplace and Redeeming Our Work. To actually heal the workplace, the text argues that we have to fundamentally redefine what work is by looking all the way back to its origins before the fall of man. The secular view, well, it sees work simply as a burdensome contract. You just trade your time to earn a living. It's purely transactional. But the theological view reframes work as a divine covenant and a totally holy calling. It's an invitation to actively co-create with God. Work was never meant to be a punishment. It was actually the original design for human flourishing. In fact, the texts phrase it exactly like this. Work is not a curse, but a gift from God. The true goal is to seek His kingdom first. Now, obviously, human flaws and living in a fallen world introduce toil and stress into our jobs, for sure. But the fundamental concept of work, that remains a divine mandate. It's a crucial platform for daily service and even worship. Think about it. When you view your spreadsheet, your classroom, or your factory floor through that specific lens, it literally changes everything. So what actually happens when a group of people take this theology and apply it to an entire business? Let's look at Section 3. Building kingdom enterprises and transforming business. A true kingdom enterprise is absolutely not just a regular secular business that happens to have a Christian fish symbol on its business cards. It's an organization that actively, intentionally seeks to honor God and transform society. The bottom line isn't just about maximizing shareholder profit at any cost anymore. That bottom line expands to include human flourishing, ethical integrity, and establishing a genuinely positive, kingdom-driven culture right smack in the middle of the secular marketplace. And the sources show how this concept kind of evolves across three distinct models. Model 1 is business for missions. This is the basic level where profits are simply donated to support separate ministries. Model 2 is business and missions, where you do your secular job, but maybe you try to share your faith with coworkers on the side. But Model 3, that's the ultimate goal presented in the text. Business as missions. This means the enterprise itself, its daily operations, the way it treats employees, its products, is the ministry. The business operates as a direct extension of God's kingdom. But we have to do a reality check here. You cannot build a healthy, transformative enterprise if the people building it are broken and bleeding inside. That takes us to Section 4, Steps to Holistic Healing, Restoring the Heart. Just as the macro workplace requires this divine realignment, our inner emotional landscape requires some profound micro healing. The texts outline 4 distinct focus areas to achieve complete holistic restoration. First, repentance for spiritual healing, which is all about realigning your relationship with God. Second, direct prayer for physical ailments. Third, deep healing for emotional trauma and the lingering pain of past memories. And fourth, casting out any spiritual oppression. It's a totally cohesive strategy for the soul, assuring us that God cares about every single layer of your pain. To really picture this, the source uses the biblical story of the blind man in Mark chapter 8. It perfectly illustrates this process. First, he's brought to Jesus, and then led away from the noise of the crowd. Next comes the first touch. But notice, his sight is only partially restored at first. He says he sees men walking around like trees. It actually requires a second touch for complete restoration. The text uses this anecdote beautifully to remind us that emotional and physical healing is rarely just instantaneous. It is a gradual, step-by-step process that requires immense patience and a real willingness to keep going back for that second touch. And this realization brings us to the ultimate, non-negotiable key to unlocking both those emotional burdens and that 75% of physical sickness we talked about earlier. Moving to Section 5, the power of forgiveness, the ultimate key. The text uses this incredibly powerful metaphor. It says forgiveness is like peeling an onion. It takes time, there will definitely be tears, but eventually you reach the center. The source deeply validates how unbelievably difficult it is to forgive someone who caused you trauma, whether that's in the workplace or in your personal life. It's just not a light switch. You peel off a layer of anger, you cry, and you think, okay, I'm done. But then next week, a whole new layer of resentment surfaces. You just have to keep peeling. So where on earth do we find the strength to do this? Well, we look at the story of Joseph. Here's a guy who was literally betrayed and sold into slavery by his own brothers. Yet years later, he looks at them and says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Joseph was able to reframe his deep trauma by looking at it through God's perspective. Recognizing that God can take even the most toxic, painful workplace betrayals and weave them into a grander, redemptive narrative, that is what empowers us to choose forgiveness over bitter retaliation. Okay, but how do you practically take action on this? The text gives us some concrete steps. First, you have to accept God's absolute forgiveness of your own shortcomings. Second, don't pretend everything is fine. Acknowledge your deep, ugly pain to Jesus. Third, and this is absolutely key, use your will to declare forgiveness over the offender. The text defines forgiveness as a deliberate choice of the will, not just waiting around for some fleeting, warm feeling that might actually never come. And fourth, as we said with the onion, just repeat the process as those new layers surface. And that brings us to Section 6, our conclusion, integrating faith and life. We started our journey today by looking at the massive global problems of toxic workplaces, and we ended in the deepest, quietest corners of the human heart. Because ultimately, a healed individual, someone freed from the heavy chains of resentment and fully aligned with the divine calling, that person naturally becomes the catalyst for healed, kingdom-focused enterprise. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. What deep wound do you need to forgive today? And how will that newfound freedom transform your workplace tomorrow? I really hope exploring this framework helps you view your daily work in an entirely new light.